Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. This is Seth Joyner show every Tuesday. Here with you, got an interesting show for you guys this week. I've got a special guest, special guy to me, who's going to be joining me for the hour. But before we get started, I just want to touch on a subject and kind of put it to rest because last week I saw in my social media comments a couple of people asked where Seth Joyner was doing all of this Deshaun Jackson chatter that was going on, and why hasn't his voice? Why haven't we heard from him? And I'll say this, and I think I said it in last week's show, but I think it might have been some people that had some questions that didn't necessarily watch the show. And the my comment was, in no way, shape, fashion, or form should anyone condone what it is that Deshaun Jackson has said. But I also said that I felt like Deshaun um, posted what he posted out of a position of pure ignorance um, in an unintelligent type of way. So in our society, do we throw away ignorant, uneducated people? No. What we do is we embrace them, we um, educate them, and we try to help make them a better person. And this situation could have been a better situation for not only Deshaun but for everyone. Um, and I said the precedent had been set when the Philadelphia Eagles decided not to um, cut or release Riley Cooper. They set the precedent for what Deshaun Jackson's situation would be. And I'll end this with big ups to Julian Edelman of the New England Patriots. If you guys have not seen his thoughts and his post that he sent out to Deshaun Jackson, it's worth watching. I commend him for how he handled the situation. And I'm telling you right now, his method and his process is what this world needs more of. For you who didn't see it, he basically said, listen, there is no place in this world for anti-Semitism. But at the same time, let's not lose focus on Black Lives Matter. And then he challenged Deshaun. He said, hey, Deshaun, why don't you and I meet? Let's go to Washington, D.C., and you can take me. I'll take you, rather, to the Holocaust Museum, and then you can take me to the African American Museum of History. And then we can sit down and have a burger and have those hard conversations that most of this country don't want to have. That's the way you handle that situation. And I respected Julian Edelman's game, but as a person, as a human being, my respect level went to a whole nother level for him for how he dealt with that situation. And I think if we can deal with situations like that in society today, then society would be a much better place. Okay, I'm stepping off my pedestal, off my soapbox right now. I'm going to bring in my good friend, the midday show host on WIP, DeCameron and Richie, my good friend, Joe DeCameron. Joe, welcome to the Seth Joyner Show, my friend.
Thank you, Seth. I appreciate it. I echo your words about Edelman and what you said there on Deshaun, and it's an honor to be on your program, man. I've always appreciated how often you've come on my show through the years, and it's my real pleasure to be on your program tonight.
Well, I know that, even when we're not on the radio, I'm not on your show, whenever we meet face to face, it's a chat fest. We've got a lot to talk about, a lot to converse about, and a lot of opinions fly back and forth. So I figured this would be a great time to have you on. And there's so much going on, with our Eagles and, in the news and the NFL. Let's start off with, the biggest news of the day. Jason Peters re-signs with the Philadelphia Eagles. And I found it ironic because I saw it on Twitter this morning right before I left. And what was ironic was they did not designate him as a tackle. They put a big red G up there and designate him as a re-signing as a offensive guard. What's your thoughts about that?
think it's a great move, Seth. I really do. I'll always be curious whether it would have happened, meaning him back on the team, if Brandon Brooks had not gotten injured. And obviously, it's a total shame Brandon Brooks got injured. He's, one of the 5 or 6 best players on the team. And I think it's, totally fair to say, completely reasonable to say the Eagles are not as good a team today as they were, whatever it was, 5 or 6 weeks ago before Brandon Brooks got hurt. So from that standpoint, they take a step backwards. But with that said, I think the Eagles are a better team than they were, yesterday. Seth, I think getting, Jason Peters on this team and having him as an option, likely to start, but at the very least to be in the mix. But I totally think will start. I don't think he comes back to be a backup to Pryor. Look, he's going to have to learn obviously the other side, a different position in the other side. But I'm happy the Eagles did it. I will always wonder though whether they would have done it if Brandon Brooks had not gotten hurt, because of course we heard so many whispers that they were interested, to do that. But we also heard reports that they wanted Dillard to be the starting left tackle. So I guess we'll never know. But what we do know is he's back in the fold, and I think it's a really good thing for the team.
Now, for my listeners, I want you guys, while you're watching, send your questions in. Joe fields live questions all day long. I get the distinction today of firing your questions at him and me being the interviewer instead of the interviewee. So fire some good questions at us and we'll get Joe to answer, those questions. Maybe I'll take a couple of questions and that just makes, for a much better show. Now, we talked about Jason Peters coming back. And to me, there's another caveat there that it's an underlying thing. Because you have to, when you talk about Jason Peters coming back and you look at how well Matt Pryor played last year, you got to think somewhere in the back of this coaching staff's mind is, not only is this a guy that's versatile enough to play guard or tackle, but what if for some reason or another Andre Dillard doesn't pan out to be the guy, or he doesn't progress the way that they want him to progress? Now, they designate him with that G, maybe to take that pressure off of Andre Dillard, where he doesn't have to look over his shoulder. But a guy that's been a multiple-time, 8, 9-time Pro Bowler at left tackle is in the fold and that he can do the job. In my opinion, that pressure is still going to be imminently there.
I agree with you, Seth. I do. And it'd be interesting to know the extent to which the Eagles specifically tell that to Dillard or not. Maybe they specify that, maybe they don't. But Dillard's got to feel it, whether they say it to him or not. And, this is one of those things. I mean, obviously for the Eagles' future, the ideal scenario is that Andre Dillard locks it in and, starts rolling through a rookie contract at a high level and the kind of guy you want to re-sign in a couple of years and have be a bird for 10 years. And maybe that happens, but, maybe it doesn't. I mean, I think it's fair to say his play last year was shaky, inconsistent, disastrous on the right side. I thought his mindset going into that game on the right side was not good at all. Talking, I guess in many ways so negatively about, the challenge ahead of him playing right tackle and going to the right side and doing everything backwards. And then his play, and I think it was the Seattle game, if I remember right, and his play reflected, kind of a mentality of, not good. So I think, Seth, that having Peters both as a starting guard but also as someone who can swing out there if need be is good, And I guess in some ways you can sort of make the case that, during training camp and whenever the Eagles hit in the early part of the season, you can make the case that Andre Dillard and Pryor in some ways are kind of competing against each other, albeit at different positions. Because if Dillard falters, but Pryor shows them that he can hang in there, then sure, Doug Peterson can move, he can move Jason Peters to left tackle real quick.
Well, my issue is always mindset, because I think, when you're drafting players and you're bringing players in as free agents, there's a lot more to it than what you see on the film. And it's a lot more to it than the metrics that, that players put up at the combine and things like that. In my opinion, mindset is a major, major part of the deal, especially when you're talking about taking a guy in the first or the second round. Your mind's got to be in the right place. So when I sit here and I hear, and it's not a knock on the guy, because you know what, hey, as a young player, I came in, I had some growing pains. All young players have growing pains. But I think the one thing different that we see with Andre Dillard is his willingness to speak outwardly about, you know, the things that he's going through, the pains that he's having to endure. And for me, that speaks to mindset. And that's problematic for me. I'm never going to allow my opponent to see my weakness, because when my opponent senses that weakness, that's the part of me that he's going to want to try to attack. When I looked at Andre Dillard coming out of college, coming from the Pac-12, there's just something about the Pac-12. It spells finesse to me. You know, nobody plays defense. It's not a physical conference. You know, it's, you know, let's see who can blow up the scoreboard the fastest. That type of mentality, to me, doesn't sit well on a team where you say you want to go out and bring in offensive linemen that are pure road graders. Okay. So I watched this guy play. I watched his film. Very good feet. Lane Johnson-esque. But when you look at Lane, Lane got dog in him, man. Lane wants to beat you up. He don't want to just block you. He wants to maul you and beat you up. He wants you to know that this is the kind of ass kicking you're going to get every single game. I just don't see that pit bull in Andre Dillard right now. I see, you know, a little puppy who has to grow, and I agree, you know, give him time to grow, but it's either in you sometimes or it's not. You know, you can't make a guy more aggressive than he really is. And so for me, there's a little bit of an issue there. You know, when you're talking about the mindset of Andre Dillard, and knowing that you've got a guy like Jason Peters, who's, when healthy, you know, that he can step in at any point in time and just snatch your job out from under you if you're not getting it done.
Listen, Seth, I agree. I do. And, you know, there was more than enough talk last year about Dillard and the mindset. And, you know, I thought it was very notable that when the offseason happened and when free agency was approaching, and then when free agency occurred, you know, the Eagles never closed the door on Jason Peters. And look, I mean, I guess strategically, rightfully so. Ultimately, they brought him back, but
I think my buddy froze up on me. Let's take a couple of these questions. I've got where did he go? Billy Cummington.
The manner in which the Eagles did tackle, but yeah, I just thought the fact that the Eagles never shut the door on Peters, to me, even before Brandon Brooks' injury, spoke volumes that they have their doubts about Dillard. And look, general managers make mistakes. Maybe Howie made one here, maybe he did not. Year two is going to be a huge factor in determining that. But boy, I think Andre Dillard, you can make the case. Now it's a little bit less so now with Peters' insurance, but you can make the case that Andre Dillard is you know, other than Carson, you know, just about the most important Eagle in 2020, because, you know, he has the responsibility of protecting Carson, you know, year 5 of his career. And if he's shaky over there, either, you know, Carson gets hurt or Dillard gets replaced.
Well, I think that's why, you know, the conversation is so heated as far as what you're talking about with Dillard, because you're talking about your franchise quarterback that you just paid last year. He's had some injuries, and that guy's got to, you know, protect the backside. And that's, therein lies the problem for me, because I've got to have a guy over there that's just, you know, they want to beat you up. They want to eat you, you know, and we can talk about what Howie wants. You know, the most telling thing that I saw in the offseason, even though they never closed the door on JP, was when Doug Peterson came out and said, you know, we've got a lot of confidence in Andre Dillard. And I just scratched. I was like, I sat up as I'm listening to this, and I was like, where did you see that at? Because everything I saw made everybody wonder whether, you know, we made the right decision in drafting this guy or not. And he said it so matter of factly, like when he said it, I was like, man, they just closed the door on JP, because Doug Peterson has stated that this is the guy. It's his job to lose in the most underlying way that you could ever, imagine. It's exactly what he did, you know. So you can't tell me that you're 100% confident after watching what this guy put on the table and all the whispering and murmuring that was going on behind the scenes about where he was and where he was psychologically, even where he was physically. Because Doug said, hey, he's getting stronger this offseason. It was almost like Doug was trying to lift him up. And to me, that was problematic, because you're telling me you're signing off on a guy that, that you're probably gonna need because you're not sure what this guy may bring to the table this year. And with the COVID situation being the way that it is, it's that much more, there's many more questions that surround it.
Well, all right. So two things that to me stand out from everything you just said. First off, I mean, let's not any of us miss the reality that let's say Dillard falters and they got to put Peters over there at left tackle. That's a disaster. I mean, meaning even if Jason Peters can hold it down for one more year and do a decent job, whatever level he does, diminish from where he was 4, 5, 6 years ago. But let's just say he's adequate or maybe even a little above average beyond that. That's still a terrible thing for the organization if Dillard is not somebody that can anchor in for the next 8 to 10 years for the franchise. That's just horrendous because, this team's been through it. Look, every team's been through it, but the Eagles certainly have been through it. Whether it's Danny Watkins as a first-round pick, whether it's Marcus Smith. I mean, we know the names. John Harris's career never really got off the ground. There are other guys. So it just sets you back. It just hurts your franchise. So hopefully from that standpoint, Dillard can anchor in. We're going to find out. The other thing that stands out to me of everything you said, Seth, is, the Doug thing, and believe me, I'm all over the place with this at times too, because I listen and I don't know how to put it. I want to quote Doug back. I want to say, well, Doug just said this, and this means, he said X and it means Y, or he said X and it means X. Like, there's such inconsistency with what Doug says and what it means. I mean, for instance, take Carson. Doug's never going to criticize Carson publicly. I think they do, frankly, a good job of shielding Carson from further scrutiny by not, they being Howie and Doug kind of publicly being more critical of him. But, I mean, if you ask me, last year in November, after 3 months of the season, and Carson cranked it up in December, and he was great, and it was a huge reason why they made the playoffs. But, I mean, if you really had truth serum on Doug Peterson last November, I'm sure he would have told you he was incredibly aggravated with Carson Wentz, but he's not going to say it in a press conference. So I just feel like, while we focus so much on what Doug says, and we used to with Andy and we did with Chip and all that stuff, it's also like you got to take this stuff with a grain of salt because I don't know how much it really even means anyway.
No, see, I'm different though because I get the distinction of sitting in post game right after the game is over and watching Doug walk into that room and make those comments, and I sit there with my pen and my paper and I take notes because Doug is an interesting listen if you listen, because he speaks between the lines.
I agree with you. I agree with that. Yeah.
And a lot of times what happens is, people look at Doug and they think of, what's the guy that was on the Andy something show.
Andy Griffin?
Yes. Yeah. Like golly gee. That's how most people look at Doug and they look at him like that. But Doug is really smart. He's a lot smarter than people give him credit for. So when I'm listening to him talk, I'm listening to what he's saying in between the lines. You're right. He'll never outwardly criticize Carson, but he says things in code that if you've played before and you've been around coaches before, you have an ear to hear that kind of stuff. And I'm listening and I'm taking notes. And so we're having these conversations on air. And I'm like, no. That's not what he said. He said this, but this is what he really meant.
No, I agree. I agree with you on that, Seth. I really do. I think from that standpoint, he's been fascinating at the podium because I agree with you. There's a lot you can discern from how he says what he says. And I know what you mean when you say in between the lines. It's it's there. I do agree totally with you on that.
And the beauty of it is too is the fact that his players love him for it. I mean, they love him for it. I mean, when he first became the head coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, I watched his first press conference, his introductory press conference, and I turned to a friend of mine. I was like, I wouldn't follow that guy if he had a bag of gold coins thrown over his shoulder with a hole in it. No way, no way. And then when Mike Lombardi came out,
yeah,
made his statements, and the players rushed to his defense, I said, wait a minute. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm missing something because players don't come to coach's defense like that if they don't believe in him. They just don't. And so I said, let me step back because if they believe in him, maybe I need to do a little further evaluation to see. And what I know is the players love him. They love him.
They do. And Seth, there's something about that first press conference I think was so fascinating, and we all jumped on it, but maybe didn't look at it quite the right way. Because I know what you're talking about, that first press conference, and the big takeaway most people had was the ridiculous series of answers that Doug had about Kansas City's final game when Doug was with, the offense coordinator under Andy, and they played that playoff game. I'm pretty sure it was against New England and Brady, and they were down by 2 scores, and they're talking about they wanted to try to time up scoring the second touchdown to tie it up so Brady wouldn't have time to get the ball back, and it just didn't make any sense because they were down 14 points, not 7 points when all that started, and he was just all over the place. But if you want to talk about, what really I think historically stands out from that, it's not so much the bumbling answer by Doug and kind of the nonsensical answer, but think about what Doug was really doing. What he was really doing was sticking up for his guy Andy Reid, who he played for, who he coached under, and who had just had a hand in helping him land the head coaching position of the Philadelphia Eagles, one of 32 spots in the NFL. The last thing Doug Peterson was going to do was going to be coach a game under Andy Reid, someone he admires clearly, leave Kansas City, get on a plane, sign a contract with the Eagles, and blast the guy that helped him get the job.
Right.
Now, could Doug have, and this is, I think, something we knew then, could he have handled it a little better? Could he have kind of, found a little bit of a niftier way to, complete a sentence that didn't make him look like he had no idea what he was talking about? Yeah, he could have. But, man, beneath all that was, here's a guy who's loyal. And I think that has shown up in a lot of different ways in the, 4 years we've seen him coach the Eagles.
And listen, there is no doubt about it. The players absolutely love him, and they will come to his defense at any time that someone has something negative to say. Let's segue into, some thoughts, Joe, about the upcoming season. There's so much indecision about what's happening and what's going on and what the season is going to look like. Some saying that, the season should be canceled. Others saying the season should be played. Others saying, have fans, no fans, full fans. There's just so much going on. Give me your thoughts on the uncertainty surrounding and circling the NFL right now.
Well, my first thought, Seth, is I'm uncertain about the uncertainty, right? Probably like everybody. All right. So I have viewed the whole time, and I have said this the whole time, that, the many months we've been talking sports with no sports. I have thought the whole time that the NFL season was in the most precarious position of the 4 main team sports in America. And the simple reasons for that, NFL, in my opinion, more challenging than the NBA, the NHL, and Major League Baseball. Basic reasons. First off, the NBA and NHL are basically trying to come back for a stretch run. So they're only really trying to play a couple games and then the playoffs, whereas the NFL has to crank it up for the start of an entire season. All right, so that's a humongous difference. Obviously, baseball, running out the clock on time and getting through some aspects of Corona, and then the negotiation between the owners and players, the season got cut in less than half. So again, that's not a full season, and that's an outdoor sport, and that's an outdoor sport where the right fielder is about 150 feet from the center fielder, and he's 150 feet from the left fielder. You have your umpire catcher conundrum with coronavirus, and that's a thing, but baseball is a far different sport. So I just always saw football because of the length of the season, the time of the year, the overlap with the flu. I mean, I'm no expert on this, but you got to imagine that's going to create some complications because there's going to be millions of Americans, including any number of athletes that play football. They're going to come down with the flu, and that's going to create does he have corona? Does he not? And obviously, you can do some testing, but there's just going to be confusion. There's going to be worry. And then obviously, just the whole nature of the way football is played. And, everyone talks about the collisions and, body on body contact, and that's not to be minimized. But man, I think a lot, Seth, about the guys in the trenches, the offensive and defensive linemen breathing up on each other, especially as that game gets going and they're tired. I mean, that's not ideal for coronavirus. We know that. And then you have the whole thing that happens prior to the games even happening, which is, the nature of training camp, the nature of the rosters. I mean, look, the Sixers took, 14 or 15 players to Orlando, and they're in a bubble, by the way. See, that's the other thing. The NBA could go to a bubble. The NHL is essentially in a bubble. Baseball's got more risk. Players can go shop on their own, so that creates a risk. But, I mean, football, there's no bubble, nor can there be. There's no spot in America, at least that I know, that you can take 32 NFL teams to a venue with 16 football fields or even 10 that have camera angles set up to broadcast an NFL football game. I mean, basketball, it's a gym. You just have a gym and you have some cameras and you have two announcers, and even if the announcers aren't there, and you can broadcast that. Football is totally different. And then the meeting room idea in football, the idea that, 90-man rosters to start camp, and it looks like they're going to cut that down, but 53-man roster in the season plus the taxi squad or practice squad, and just, the quarterback meeting room. I mean, I'll tell you one thing, Seth, if I'm the Eagles, if Josh McCown is healthy enough to play, I'm signing him today. I'm signing a fifth and sixth quarterback. I mean, I don't want, three quarterbacks and you're out. What is that? So, I mean, look, we know the deal. I mean, the president and a vice president at any time in U.S. history, they're not looking to fly together on a plane because what happens if something happens, right? They don't want them flying together. Well, it's like quarterbacks in the room. I mean, you're going to have three quarterbacks in the same room in a meeting for hours and hours in a week. And what happens if one of them got sick and didn't know it and the other two get sick? I mean, so I look, Seth, to answer your question, it's a long-winded way of saying, obviously, I don't know. I think it's concerning. I'm excited sports is coming back. I'm excited the NFL is going to try it. I just have always viewed the NFL as being in the most precarious position. And there's nothing that has happened that has convinced me otherwise. Nothing.
Well, I mean, as time has gone on, they've been in the most precarious of positions. I mean, they have essentially been the only major league sports team that hasn't been affected by corona other than their off-season program. But you also have to consider, I keep trying to tell people, when you look at the NFL, you're talking about a $12 to $15 billion industry. If those players want to play, you think that the owners are not going to try to force that to happen? And Mark Mule, one of my viewers, he put the question up. The NCAA is noodling on a spring season instead of fall. Would the NFL consider that? How would you consider that? I just think that the old Wu-Tang clan, right?
Yep.
Cash moves everything around me. I just don't see any way possible that the NFL doesn't do everything within its power to get a season off the ground this fall.
I agree. Well, I see, Seth, I agree.
Now, they may push it back a little bit.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, there's going to be.
I agree. They're going to try. And Seth, here's the other thing to me. Like, if you knew for sure that by delaying it 6 weeks, you could do it and you could have the full season and maybe you have fans or maybe you have partial fans. Sure. I mean, I'm sure the NFL would gladly delay 6 weeks or 10 weeks or 15 weeks if they knew it guaranteed them a regular season, a full season, fans in the stands, like whatever. But the reality is, and we all know this, there's nothing, and I mean nothing, that is going to be guaranteed by delaying anything. So I completely doubt that they'll delay. I mean, the one thing that could get them to delay is if there's, some collection of players that obviously is sick and God forbid someone's really sick and then that creates a panic around the rest of the league. I mean, that could get it off the rails. We know that. But I don't think that they're going to delay to try to sync things up with a vaccine or anything that gives them hope that, hey, things will be better to start in November than to start in September. I think they're full systems go right now.
Joe, you're talking about, listen, for me, the vaccine thing is out of the question. From what I understand, you need at least 18 months to 4 years to formulate a vaccine. And if they start talking about they have one already, then that makes me wonder what the heck is really afoot and what's really going on. The other thing is, if you understand, how vaccines actually work, if you've got children, then you take your kid to get vaccinated. For the next 2 days, their nose is running, they're coughing, they're crying, they're sick. Why? Because you just took some of what you're vaccinating them against and put it in them. You think I want them putting some COVID in me so to stir up my immune system? That's not happening. And if players are smart enough to understand that, they don't want that happening. Listen, I don't propose to be some kind of doctor or scientist either. But in my opinion, strictly in my opinion, and you and I, we can talk about our opinions, and people, you can light me up in the comments if you want to. The COVID is nothing more than a very, 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 very strong strain of the flu. If you're 64 or older, if you got pre-existing health conditions, if you're so on and so forth, yeah, you're going to have issues. You're going to have major issues, okay? But it's hard for me to believe that, this thing is not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere, Joe, because people are going to test positive. Yeah, we're spiking in Arizona where I live. You want to know why? Because we quarantined and you had people away from each other for 2.5 months. And the minute you open up the floodgates and you let people out, what did they do? They wanted to know whether they had it. So you know what they did? They started getting tested, okay? And you're not going to tell me that I haven't been exposed to it or somebody else hasn't been exposed to it. Maybe my immune system is a little bit stronger than somebody else's, who have struggled with it. Maybe I'm asymptomatic. Maybe I have it, but I'm not. I'm probably never ever going to show any symptoms because you know what? Quite frankly, I don't get sick. So that's what you're dealing with. So are you talking about never ever having football again, never having baseball, basketball, or hockey again? Because that's what you're really faced with.
You're right. You're right. I mean, I think, look, you hit a lot of profound stuff there. I like how you ended that because that's the challenge for the whole nation. I mean, forget sports. That's the challenge. In the absence of a cure-all, if one even ever happens, then society is going to have to try to figure out, governments, locally, nationally, individual people, what to do. And, that's obviously a real conundrum for people to figure out. I mean, ultimately, I tend to think that the society will probably move in a direction where a lot of people come out to work and have some social engagement, and people that have pre-existing conditions and are older are going to know that it's probably not wise for them to be the ones that come out with the rest of us. That's my guess, and that's where you need messaging and leadership that explains that kind of stuff. But this stuff, I mean, look, admittedly, this is over my head as far as detailed knowledge. There's no doubt about that. But I just hope that, I mean, I'm confident we're going to get to a point when things are going to settle down. I just don't know if that's 3 years from now or 1 year from now or 5 years from now. I just don't know.
We're too advanced of a civilization not to come up with the answers. I mean, if you can send a man to the moon, you mean to tell me you can't figure out a virus? It's just,
Well, I agree, but we don't know when. I agree with you. We just don't know when.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And just to get back on track here, Billy Covington Jr. posted a question. He said, can we have players all wear masks, dark visors, and with masks underneath? As you probably know, the NFL and Oakley have been working together for years. They've created the mask that the eye shields that you see. But now, in concert with the NFL and the NFLPA, they're creating these lower visors that go over the mouth so that, to catch any kind of droplets or any spit out of the mouth. How effective can that possibly be? And how are you going to get the players to buy in? I mean, first of all, you got restrictions as far as your eyes are concerned. That's, I can understand that. Okay, but when you're talking about a face mask with a face shield and then a mouth shield, where's your air supposed to come from? Is all the air supposed to come from underneath? You got to get a quote from a guy like J.J. Watt. He said, "Hey, I thought those masks, those shields were cool a couple of years ago, and I had them. I wanted to try one. I had the guy put one on me. He's like, after about 10 minutes in practice, I decided, hey, I get this thing off of me. He said, I just completely got claustrophobic. So now you're talking about a mask over the eyes, a mask over the mouth. Come on, man.
Yeah, well, listen, no doubt, and that's where they need to get this stuff on players as quickly as possible, just to find out what they think and do some trial and error. But I agree with you; it's going to be a mess. I mean, look, we saw, I mean, hop in sports, but Joel Embiid in the NBA playoffs 2 years ago when he had the face gear, and he was losing his mind, not seeing as well as he previously had and having perspiration on it, and he threw it off his face a couple times in the middle of the game, and so I can only imagine this thing will be an issue for them. Look, I mean, Seth, I can't even fathom the first day, the first week when the players convene for training camp. I mean, the procedural, not just the procedures, but the discussion of procedure. I mean, you're going to need, I mean, whether it's Doug Peterson or someone else from the organization to give a presentation to the players before they do anything. It's going to have, it's going to have 373 bullet points. You got to, I mean, they're going to have to do their best. It's what it is, but they're full system go. But when people talk about the NFL hasn't had issues yet because they did the draft and that gives people hope. I mean, they did a draft online or virtually or whatever you want to call that. And look, they canceled practices. I mean, it's really easy to cancel OTAs. You just say we're not having OTAs, and it's a level playing field because while it probably diminishes the level of play that we see in September, it's the same for all 32 teams. So okay, that's what it is. But the real challenges are up ahead. We'll find out.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And as far as OTAs, as far as training in the summertime, I mean, how does that affect these young guys and their ability, to show these coaches what they can do? Their chances become greatly minimized by all of this as well. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about life and death situations.
Right.
You just never know when one of the guys that are playing professional football who has an underlying health condition where this could turn in the most negative of ways. I mean, if you get a guy that gets sick, a guy that goes down, and all of a sudden he can't recover from this thing, they intubate him, and then all of a sudden, we lose a guy. Man, you got some serious problems on your hand. And I've even heard the chatter in the conversation about having players sign waivers.
Yeah.
In order to get into the facility and participate in the season.
Yeah, that's a tough ask, in my opinion, for the players. I mean, if I'm a player, maybe I sign it, but then I say, well, maybe I want something for signing it, like something extra. I mean, you would know this better than me, Seth, but I just know that would make me uncomfortable. I mean, you're asking me to do my job, and that's cool, but now you're asking me, I suppose, with the waiver to sign away some right to, litigate something down the road if something goes bad, and it's like, now you want me to sign away that right? That would rub me the wrong way.
Yeah, and I'm getting some interesting questions. David Crane chimes in. He says, since more coaches are older, they're at higher risk. Not only do you have the coaches that are older, but the majority of the officials in the NFL are older. So it goes way beyond just how it affects the players, but it's a situation. How does it affect the coaches, the older coaches? How does it affect the referees that are reffing the games? This thing just has so many tentacles that it's scary.
Well, it does, and I think the other thing that really hits me, again, back to football, just to use the comparison with hockey and basketball. I mean, hockey and basketball are going into a bubble. One league calls it a bubble, the other league calls it a hub. It's basically the same thing. Football, the Eagles athletes are going to be in Philadelphia. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the Eagles set up a service that gets the athletes their food, but they're in society, and this isn't go away for 2 months, and after 4 weeks, half the teams are eliminated, and now you're down to 8 teams, and then you're down to 4 teams, and you can see the finish line. And LeBron James says not only to his teammates but also to the other 3 teams left when there's only 4 left, "Hey guys, let's buckle in. We're all out of here in the next 28 days. Half of us are out of here in 14 days. Let's not mess around." Like, you can get to that finish line. I mean, maybe you have a problem, but you can see how you can get to that finish line in essentially a quarantine. But the NFL, with the issues related to being in society, not being in a bubble, playing a full season, having a big roster, having the nature of practices be what they are, meetings rooms. I mean, that's there's a lot there.
Too much.
And by the way, Seth, you brought up the idea of young players and players need to acclimate, and obviously this is true. I mean, we could talk about I'm sure there's obviously there's players on every single team that are affected by this. I feel bad. I feel bad for the Corey Clements of 3 years ago. They're the guy trying to make a team that now might not even make a training camp roster. If they take the training camp roster from 90 to 75 or 90 to 70, Corey Clement that year might not even get invited to Eagles training camp. So you're going to have players, and it's kind of like the minor leaguers in baseball that basically have to make a determination. Do I just kind of pause my life for 12 months, go get a job somewhere, try to hone my skills on my own, and stay in the game of chasing the dream 12 months from now, 12 months from now, 24 months from now, whenever it is, when stuff gets more back to normal and rosters are expanded. So you have that issue, but you also have the tangible issue. I mean, it goes for all teams, but let's talk about stuff like, think about the Eagles' non-practicing issues. You got a guy like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. You're trying to develop him, and he is important, even though I think it's fair to say we all wish he wasn't a focal point of being a factor for the Eagles. I mean, with Alshon's injury, you got to think he's going to get an opportunity. You want to see him advance. Jalen Mills is moving to safety, Seth. And so he's got to move to safety in an offseason when there is literally no offseason. So, Dillard as a second-year player playing left tackle, with the franchise quarterback. I mean, there's just, and again, this goes for every team. We could name players on every team, but you're dealing with those realities. I mean, think about the linebackers. I mean, the Eagles basically have no linebackers except they're called linebackers, and it's
I'm excited about the 2 draft picks, though.
Good.
I am.
That one guy was the 3rd or 4th rounder. I forget his name. He looked like he could strike people.
Well, we'll get there in a second. So let's switch gears, because we can go on about the what ifs.
Yeah.
Of this COVID thing, until the cows come home. I think the NFL is going to make a run at trying to make this happen. And as football fans, all you can do is hope for the best. We hope that it works out for the best, because at the end of the day, football is unlike every other sport. You don't get 82, 82, and 162. You get 16. When I drive past that link, every time I drive past it, I think to myself, there's 52 weeks in a year, and you only get 8 of them that really count in there.
Yeah.
That's how big football is, and it would be, it would be a travesty to lose the season, but it would be even more tragic, if something happened to these players and we lost one of these players and it was unnecessary.
Yep.
So let's talk about the prospects for the Eagles. We always in Philadelphia, we love to do that. We love to prognosticate and talk about, what it could be, what it might be, what it should look like. When I look at their free agency acquisitions and I look at their trades, it's hard to look at one guy on there and say they made a mistake. You make the trade for Slay, absolute home run. You go and you get Hargraves. You boost your middle. With not only a guy who can be a run stopper, but a guy, who can take some of those double teams off of Fletcher Cox. You sign Brown, Latavius Brown. You bring him in to maybe compete for a starting job because, he hasn't had the clear opportunity to do that. But that he's a proven special teams player. You bring in Roby Coleman, a guy who, that can lock down, but you're going to have that same competition at that slot corner position. But you got a guy that's proven that he can hold that spot down. And then you bring in a guy in Will Parks before you know that you're going to have the ability to go out and draft a Kayvon Wallace. You bring in a Will Parks, a guy, that can create even that much more competition for a guy like Jalen Mills. Even though he's moving there, you don't want to just give him the job. You want to make him earn it. And then on draft day, you make a trade and you bring in, a world-class sprinter with pretty darn good hands when he can stay healthy. And Marquise Goodwin. Give me your perspective on just what Howie was able to do throughout free agency, understanding and knowing what the needs of this football team were.
Well, first off, Seth, I love the way you framed that. And the reason I say that is you went through a ton of different players, and there was an accentuation of the positive. And I think there was a lot of positive. And you started with Slay, and that's the obvious. And getting him for a third and fifth round draft pick, I thought was great value. Now he's 29, so you kind of wish he was 26, but he's not. And you presumably can plug him in for 3 or 4 years and get really good values. I think that's huge. But I think the thing, because I could echo your sentiments across the board on the players you listed. I agree with you. I think the thing that has struck me, Seth, this offseason in talking to hundreds, thousands of fans, is that there's been such a skew for so many people to the negative of this offseason, and that it just kind of baffles me a little bit. It's like there's been so much focus on what Howie did not do, and people talk about, well, they don't think he did enough with the wide receiver spot, and the thing I always try to come back to people and say, well, okay, hold on. First off, he did draft a wide receiver in the first round. Now maybe you preferred a different wide receiver, but he got a first round wide receiver draft. You can't say Howie didn't address him. He drafted a receiver in the first round. Now he's got to play and he's got to be good. But that's number one. Number two, Howie was handcuffed. Let's talk about that position. I mean, do I wish the Eagles could have more productive wide receivers that you can count on to be healthy? Alshon, you can't count on his health. Deshaun, you really can never count on his health. Yes, I would prefer that you could have more reliable wide receivers, younger and better. But here's the deal. Howie made a mistake 12 months ago, 18 months ago, locking in a 2020 contract for Alshon and Deshaun. It was a mistake. It is what it is. You can't take it back. And so when everyone complains about disappointment that that's what they have and they didn't do more for the wide receiver room, I try to tell people, like, this is how it goes sometimes. I mean, when you're a general manager of a team, you're going to make some mistakes. And hey, Seth, you and I both know. I mean, we and millions will hold a general manager accountable if those mistakes pile up and up and up and up and up. And I don't think they're up here. I think Howie's made mistakes that are here, but I don't think they're here. And I sense a lot of people are acting like they're here. I don't get that. I think that there's a salary cap, which means you simply cannot feel great at every position entering any year. Because if you did, it would be an impossibility. And I just feel so many Eagles fans, Seth, have focused on the negative, and they'll point out the 3 or 4 things the Eagles don't have, and they don't look at the fact that I think the Eagles are still better than the Giants and Redskins. And I think they're right there with Dallas. Dallas is a very talented team, there's no doubt. But, look, put your work in, go out and beat Dallas, and you can win this division again. I'm just amazed at how much negativity has been in the air. I know the Eagles have backslid. There's no doubt about it. But, I just – the expectation, if people had – and look, Doug said it, the new norm. And so, that put something in the minds of people, and it was exciting to hear and all of that stuff. But, I mean, how realistic – I mean, let's think of it this way. Doesn't just about every team that wins a Super Bowl backslide in the next 2 years? Every team. Because if you didn't, you would win 2 straight Super Bowls or 3 straight Super Bowls, which, by the way, no one's ever won 3 straight Super Bowls. So they have slid back. They clearly need to regenerate. This was an important draft. I mean, there's no doubt Goddard and Miles Sanders were outstanding draft picks. And other than those two, it's been lacking for a couple of years. So they need some good picks, and they need some of these free agents to hit. I just am amazed at how negative so many people have been about the Eagles this offseason. I don't get it.
Well, for me, I think it's for me when I think about it, it's more about the development of players than anything else. I mean, every single player that you draft, you're doing nothing more than drafting for potential. You can't make that mistake in the first round. But once you exit the first round, everything else you're drafting on potential. And the minute that you draft that kid, now it's incumbent upon your coaches to have the ability to now turn around and turn that kid into a player. Now, you've seen a lot of coach overturn on this Eagles roster this year. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that in certain positions we couldn't get guys developed. We couldn't get, things turned around. When I think about the wide receiver, I get everybody's desire to have a proven commodity, because when you look at a Carson Wentz walk into his own last year, at the end of the season, and I'd be hard pressed for anybody to say that he did not do that. He walked into his own. He walked into being the clear leader of this franchise, down the stretch of last year's season. But everyone would love to see more accomplished, more experienced wide receivers. Yeah. But when I look at this draft, you know what I see? I see how we go out and bring in a guy like Marquise Goodwin at wide receiver who has some experience. But I also see him go and draft 3 wide receivers in this draft and say to himself, okay, well, because I think this is important. I think it's important that the Eagles build around Carson. And if you look at the last 2 drafts, the first 3 picks last year, and I think the first 3 picks this year have been on, and I could be wrong by a pick or 2, but they've been about how do we put the pieces around Carson for Carson to succeed. Because last year, I believe they went into the offseason understanding and believing that they were going to extend him, that they were going to make him the franchise guy. So once you do that, your hand is almost forced to now build around Carson as much as you can. So now you have to have players around him that can grow with him.
Yeah.
The hard part for Carson was, Nick Foles just won a Super Bowl. You got a split locker room. Some guys are Foles guys, some guys are Carson guys. That prevents Carson from being able to step into his rightful role as the leader of the football team. So now Nick Foles exits stage right, but you still got some of the players. You still got some of the players that are there that are in Nick Foles' camp. When some of those players exit the field last year, you began to see what? Carson Wentz be able to have some young guys around him that look to him for leadership, that look to him, for how to develop. So now Howie Roseman goes out and he drafts these young receivers that can grow with Carson. Now, you might not get to where you want to get to as fast as you want to get there, but I think that this is the right thing to do for the sake of Carson Wentz. Okay, so when you look at this draft, they took Rager. I was more in the camp that, hey, why not take a guy that's proven the productivity of Justin Jefferson? How do you take, a Jalen Rager over that guy? But obviously, this is the guy that they wanted.
Yeah,
that was obvious. They went and they got him. Hey, let's see how it pans out. Head scratcher, at the 53rd. You go and you take a quarterback right after you just signed your franchise quarterback.
Yes, Seth, I disagree. And Seth, I had this battle with so many people, so let's hit it right now.
Okay.
So first off, let's get to Carson, and then we'll get to Hurts. Here's my all right. So I agree with what you said about Carson in December. He was magnificent. He was one of the better players in the NFL last year in December. And it seemed that having a new cast of players that, as you said, would look up to Carson instead of be frustrated and have bad body language. And I do think Aguilar and Alshon both had bad body language out on the field, and that was probably tough for Carson. But I do think, aside from that, Carson's just got to be better. And I'm not moving off that. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, and maybe they don't even want to think about it. But it's my opinion. I mean, Carson Wentz is being paid to be a top player in this league. He doesn't have to be the best. He doesn't have to be a top 3 quarterback, but he's got to be more consistently a top 6 to 8 quarterback, in my opinion, in pro football, to warrant that contract, and more important than the contract, just to lead the Eagles where we all want to see him lead them. And by the way, frankly, I'd like him to be better than the 8th best quarterback. I'd like him to be in the top 3, and I think he has that potential. But, his accuracy had issues last year. His footwork, I think, was a main factor in that regard. Seth, I have battled with people, and I can't prove it. I can't get in his head. I just sense that he doesn't see the field as well as people seem to think he does. I mean, this idea when he came out of college that he almost had this Peyton Manning-like ability to know and read, and I don't know, between pre-snap and post-snap, honestly, I see some confusion. I see freneticness. I see a pocket presence issue that, to my eye, looks scattered and frenetic, and of course that leads to the fumbles. So I feel like he's got to be better, and I just don't think there's enough people that say that, and it's honestly how I feel. And then taking it to Hurts, and one other point on that, and then to Hurts. So there was also something that happened in December that was such a critical part, and it didn't surprise me that Carson played better when they let Carson get out of the pocket more. Designed two things to me: design plays out of the pocket, but also probably dug in his ear saying, "Listen, Carson, we're 5-7. I know we've been trying to protect you for all the right reasons because we want you to be this quarterback for the next 12 years of our team, but we're 5-7. Our margin for error is down to 0." And so if we don't win these games, we lose. So even if it's not a design out of the pocket play, I want you to be willing to take more chances. We need that now. And I thought Carson did an exceptional job in that month of assuming that role. And I thought he was awesome. But the question I wonder, Seth, is when September of 2020 comes around, which, by the way, is in a month and a half, they're supposed to play games, or 2 months. Are we going to get the Carson with design rollouts from last December? And the mentality to take some chances and get 1 or 2 or 3 first downs a game with his legs on third down? Or are we going to get the Carson of Doug and Carson and probably Howie with, hey, let's be careful here. He's been injured the last 2 years. He's got an injury history going back to college and high school, and we need to be more conservative in September and October because, again, we're not only trying to get him to February, we're trying to get him to the year 2030. I don't know which way they're going to go. I just know this. I am certain that the Carson that gets out of the pocket, both mentally when a play breaks down, but also by design, is a better Carson. Just is. So, if you told Allen Iverson, listen, Allen, you're going to be safer if you just take 18-foot jump shots, but you're going to be better if you drive to the hole, but you're going to get knocked in your butt like 17 times a game, you got to make a choice. And we know Allen Iverson chose, I'm going to the hole. And that was the best version of Allen Iverson. Carson's got to make a choice, and Doug and Howie and Carson together have got to make a choice. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's like one or the other. Obviously, there's a balance, but I do think that's an important issue for them to figure out. And so before Hurts, what do you think of that? What do you make of all that?
I just think that, listen, to play quarterback in the city of Philadelphia is a major, major undertaking. I am always of the belief that 99.5% of the players that play in the NFL, it's a 3-year undertaking for those guys to realize their true potential and their true talent. And Carson's development has been arrested because of injuries. That's just a fact. He comes in year 1, takes the team to 7-9 after not even believing that he's going to be the starting quarterback.
Right.
Year 2, he's on a MVP pace, goes out to LA, tears his ACL, his LCL. And listen, for all you people that go on about Carson can't stay healthy, players get hurt all the time.
Yeah.
If you play long enough, I know, because I had 6 surgeries in my 13 years of playing. If you play long enough, you're going to get hurt. That's the nature of the beast, okay? So he goes in, he gets the surgery, comes back the next year, week 4, they're 1-3, coming off a Super Bowl championship, and everybody is panicking. Oh, Carson needs. I'm like, listen, he doesn't need to play. You don't need to rush him back, because it's one thing to be physically well, it's another thing to be physically and psychologically well, and that has a lot to do with your ability to just turn it loose and let it fly and play the game like you're a teenager again. It just doesn't happen that way. There's a hurdle to overcome physically, and there's a hurdle to overcome mentally. They rush him back. He comes back week 4. We get towards the end of the season. Oh, something's wrong with his back, So they're running these MRIs and these scans. They can't see it. Oh, something's wrong with my back. They run it again. Now you see it. It's a hairline fracture. We can see the calcification. Well, broke his back. Why? Because he was probably compensating for the knee, because he wasn't ready to play, okay? So now, arrested development again.
Yeah.
Okay? So then, really, you're talking about Carson Wentz being in his 4th year. So he hasn't had, and my theory is if a kid plays for 3 years nonstop from his rookie year to his third year with no injuries, okay, and he doesn't develop, it's highly likely he's not going to develop. Okay. Now, if their development is arrested throughout that 3 year span, that's a different deal.
And that would be Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham, for as much as he was a disappointment, dealt with injuries in those years. And
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, and then and the opposite of that would be Freddie Mitchell, who, to the best of my knowledge, was not injured. Clearly was, okay, but not what you'd want from a first-round pick. And his career followed suit. That those 3 years were telling. Even though he improved a little bit, he just wasn't really a guy you could really rely on.
Right. So that development period for Carson, in my opinion, has to be expanded. And I think what you saw at the end of last year was him walking into year 3 and moving to the next level. I just don't think he's going backwards. I think that he's in a position right now where he understands the offense backwards and forwards. I think he's in a position where, he's got command. He's got the respect of the players that are left on this roster. He's got leadership, as far as that's concerned. And I think that the injuries are part of the game. The blow to the back of the head last year, come on. That could happen to anybody. The minute they take your helmet, you go in the blue tent nowadays, your day is over. I don't care if it's the Super Bowl. Your day is over.
Yeah.
So I'm not buying into that. And so before you get on to Hurts, my thing is I don't mind the Hurts pick. I actually love the kid as a quarterback. I just don't love it at 53.
All right.
I don't love it at 53, Joe. I'm sorry.
Right. Here's where I'm at. So I'm a little bit more down on Wentz than you, although I hope that your sense that he's about to take off is on. We'll find out. Here's what I think Hurts is. First off, I think Doug and Howie were frustrated with Carson. That's just my guess. Who knows? That's my guess. I think that you also have a situation where the NFL is headed in 2 years to a 17-game schedule, which let's talk about what that means. That means 17 games, and by the way, expanded playoffs. There's only going to be one bye one bye per conference, which basically means unless you're the number 1 seed, you've now got to win 4 playoff games in order to win the Super Bowl. Okay, so now you're talking about 17 plus 4. You're talking about 21 games. That is a long, long way for a starting quarterback to stay healthy. And we, look around the league at how many quarterbacks don't go 21, whether you want to call it 21 straight games or even 16 out of 21 to help you get to the playoffs. You know what I mean? Or maybe it's the first 15, but then he's out at the end, and so he's not there for the playoffs. To me, there's a lot there. But the other thing, Seth, I come back to time and again. I mean, I think Howie Roseman, I sense, is really good at kind of studying the league, let's say. But I got to imagine there's nothing better that Howie has than studying his own history with the Eagles, meaning the history of the Eagles and his tenure. And if there is one thing that has stood out, and I'll start it with your squad in 91, and what a shame that with that defense, an all-timer, maybe the greatest of all time, and Seth, I've told you before, I think it's a damn shame that your defense nationally does not get the recognition of the 85 Bears and, the Ravens of 2000 and, a couple other notable ones that certainly merit, discussion. Seattle of 2013 and for a couple years there. And you guys were right there. I mean, I believe that. And we all know the drill. Randall gets hurt game 1. McMahon gets hurt repeatedly. I think, Seth, not only do you make the playoffs with McMahon, I think you're probably the second best team in the conference, maybe the best. I mean, you're probably facing the Washington Redskins for the right to go to the Super Bowl with Jim McMahon, in my opinion. But you don't have McMahon, not long enough. So now you're doing the whole merry-go-round of, the deal, Pat Kemp and Jeff Kemp and Pat Ryan and Brad Gable, and we all know, that led to a 10-6. That's what it is. But, Howie knows this. It's like 91, you got that. Randall out, bang, game 1. 93, Randall's out in game 4. You run into a situation in 95. Okay, that's a benching. Randall not as good. Hey, thankfully Rodney Peete could step in there. It took a 1-3 team, went 9-3 down the stretch to go 10-6. Rodney Peete was better than Randall that year. That's why Ray and Gruden made the decision. 96, Rodney Peete gets hurt like the 4th or 5th game. Ty Detmer goes in it, and we could just keep going and going and going and going here. I mean, obviously you have your McNabb years. You have You have 2002 when he gets hurt. And the combination of Detmer and granted, it was the defense that was winning the special teams, but Detmer and AJ went in there and held it down at least enough. And but you also have your seasons where things sank, like in 05. I mean, 05, when Donovan got hurt and Mike McMahon went in there, the season was over. And there's a lot of other players that got hurt. But compare that to 06 when Donovan gets hurt and you have Garcia to go in there. I mean, Mike McMahon is here and Garcia is up here. It's just like, so I appreciate Howie's decision to reinforce the backup quarterback position, knowing that he knows, and we could keep going. We could talk about the year that Vic got hurt and Foles came in. We could talk about the year. I mean, again, there's other bad examples. Like when Vince Young got in there, he wasn't very effective. So the difference between a good backup and a bad backup literally can save your season and help you make the playoffs or crash. And we've seen that around the league, and we've really seen it here. And we obviously saw an all-time example with what Nick Foles did in 2017. And by the way, we saw it again with what Nick Foles did in 2018, not to the Super Bowl. But hey, that was really fun. They went 3 games down the stretch in December. They win a game on the road against the Bears. They're very competitive in a game against the Saints. I mean, they almost got back there. So I just think with the increased number of games about to be played, with Carson's personal injury history, and I agree with you, there's a huge degree of bad luck there, but there's also a style of play with Carson that probably leads to more injuries than others, both because he's good when he's out of the pocket and he holds onto the ball a lot. And just with the nature of how violent the game is, and you're trying to get to February, I appreciate that Howie prioritizes who he thinks is a quality backup to be under contract for 4 years. I think it was a very wise decision. And most people disagree with me, and that's fine. I thought it was a very smart decision. I really did.
Okay, and I'm going to respect your decision, but I'm going to give you one thought to just debunk it. Okay. I don't have a problem with you addressing the fact that you may have injury issues with Carson Wentz. Okay. But you're not telling me that Jalen Hurts is coming in here and he's the automatic backup.
No.
If Carson Wentz gets hurt early in this season, the Eagles season is over. Nate Sudfeld's not taking us to the playoffs. Jalen Hurts is not taking us to the playoffs. It's going to take Jalen Hurts at least a year to 2 years to where he's a viable backup that can step in. So my thing is, that's why I keep saying not at 53, because there's enough viable guys that are out there that are veteran guys that can get you 5, 6, 7 games, that can keep you in the playoff race, now, opposed to using, you mean to tell me that we couldn't have got a player at 53 that could contribute to this roster right now? Because even with the COVID, you're not getting anything out of Jalen Hurts this year.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. I really do. But this is where, and maybe people weren't hearing as much or enough. Like Howie, and he talked a couple times, February and March, and I don't remember exactly when this was, but he said it, to the best of my knowledge, 2 times. He talked about how there was sort of, I'm not going to say he said reset, but he said something that sort of indicated 2020, 21, and 2022 are kind of a new grouping of years. And the 2019 and 18 and 17 are gone. And that this was sort of again, I don't know the exact phrasing, but basically what he was saying is we're entering a new zone here. And I agree with you, Seth. I don't expect much from Jalen Hurts in this first year, and God forbid if Carson got hurt, Jalen Hurts would probably be pretty overmatched. I totally agree. But, you draft a player for 4 years as a second-round draft pick on his contract. And so I think the hope is that he develops in a way that can make him a more viable quality backup in 2021, 2022, and 2023. That's how I see it. And I think for a lot of, Eagles fans, and Seth, I'm sure for you both as a fan and a former player and someone that just bleeds green. For those watching right now, by the way, I've seen Seth actually bleed, and it actually comes out green, and I admire you for that, Seth. Actual green. But no, Seth, it's just sometimes you got to take the long view. And I know that's not comfortable for everyone that wants the Eagles to win this game today, the next game, and then the next one, and then the next one. But that's what it is sometimes. That's certainly what it was in 2016. They probably would have been – you can make the case better with Bradford, make the case better with any number of players in 2016 instead of Carson Wentz, but they throw him in the fire and say he's going to get better. And
maybe that was aggravating for some of the veterans. A guy like Connor Barwin, and he didn't have a ton left at that point, but that's a bummer for him. He's nearing the end of his career. He's got a rookie quarterback. What are the chances you're really going to win? I'm sure guys like Peters probably thought the same thing, but lo and behold, the next year they won. So I'm just saying, I get the idea of like, let's bite the apple to win this game. But, part of a general manager's job is to develop for the future. I think Howie was very clear. Again, I don't remember the exact sentence, but very clear that this was kind of a new grouping of years. And he viewed this as the beginning of that grouping. And I think the Hurts pick speaks to that. I really do.
Just over time, we'll see, man. The thing that blew me away the most was his comment that just, I'm like, no, he didn't. He said, we're a quarterback factory.
Yeah, I know.
That one just right over my head. I'm like, do you want me to start naming quarterbacks that you drafted that didn't work out, and you're going to stand before this mic and say that, the Philadelphia Eagles are a quarterback factory?
Well, the biggest miss was Cobb from the stand. I mean, look, there's a lot of players that didn't matter because they were backups and maybe they played a game or two. It didn't matter. Cobb was the guy that they had their hands around for a couple of years to develop him. He replaced, obviously, a great player, albeit a declining player, McNabb, but they handed Cobb the job. And I know he only played a half of one game against Green Bay, but I remember watching that game, Seth, and it looked to me like he was totally overmatched. And then when he went to Arizona, it wasn't much better. And unfortunately, he got hurt. But I agree with you. I thought it was an unnecessary comment, a little haughty by Howie to kind of go there. But here's the part to me that I think this is just the way I view the Eagles and the way I view Howie viewing the Eagles. I think Howie wants to be stocked up at the position. And I think the fact that, I've called it before, like the dual quarterback theory. I mean, if you remember when they drafted Carson, they still had Sam Bradford. They didn't know how they were going to get rid of Sam Bradford. And they, it seems, did not initially intend to get rid of him, that first year. It was obviously the Teddy Bridgewater injury led to the Bradford trade, led to Carson actually playing. But, the idea was we're stocking up. Obviously, Carson's going to be the guy for the future. And we're not going to be afraid to have multiple players at the most important position in sports, because two players gives us a better chance to win certainly than zero players, and maybe than one. And that's just how I think he views it. Whether people like it or not, that's how I think he views it. And that's why I think they drafted Jalen Hurts. All of that stuff, that's why I think they drafted him.
All right. Before we move off of this, I'm just going to say this. I believe that what's going to wind up happening with Jalen Hurts, they're going to develop him over 4 years. By the time they get to year 5, Carson's going to be an elite level quarterback in the NFL. With basically, he's going to be a top 3 quarterback in the NFL, and they're going to be in a position for draft capital. I said that when I saw the pick. That's the first thing that came to my mind was draft capital.
Look, distinct possibility, and that I'm just guessing off the top of my head, probably has the greatest value after the third year when you still control his rights for another year, and you give him the chance to, essentially him and his agent, work out a team to go to and work out a big deal. And that's all predicated on whether Hurts can show enough to warrant, people thinking he's good. It's like the Mark Brunell thing. I mean, Mark Brunell didn't play much, but he played enough that people said, hey, this guy can play, and Green Bay traded him. And by the way, the Eagles should have made that trade. The Eagles had a chance and passed on that. That was a whole nother matter. Sometimes I think of these things, Seth, and I still shake my head. But look, I agree with you. I think that's a distinct possibility. If Carson's healthy, Jalen Hurts won't be here 5 years from now. It's just the way it is. But, there's a lot of things that could happen in the meantime. Carson could get hurt again. He could not do what you think he's going to do going like that. Carson could level off. He could regress. So and to your point, they could trade Jalen Hurts and have gotten good backup value in the meantime, or no value in the meantime if Carson stays healthy, and then you try to trade him down the road for something. Possible.
All right, as we wrap, Joe, this is the last topic. So I was listening to you and Richie today in your conversation about Howie in the agent poll, where he came out as the smartest GM in the NFL, but the 4th least trustworthy of GMs in the NFL.
Yeah.
And you didn't seem to believe that was much of a problem, while John really thought it was problematic.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in the camp with John in the fact that, if I'm an agent and I've got a guy and I'm shopping him to Howie Roseman and I can't trust him, that's problematic. Maybe you don't get a DeAndre Hopkins because that's problematic. As a player, if I can't trust the people that I work for, that's problematic. And how that inhibits him from being able to do his job. And trust me, he's done a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Cleaning up with the mess that Chip left in such short time, being able to build a roster with major injuries to maybe 3 to 5 starters and then continue to go on and win a Super Bowl. Listen, he's a phenomenal GM in my opinion. But that trustworthy thing carries some major weight as far as I'm concerned. When you're talking about your dealings with agents and players and how you continue to approach the free agent market. Obviously, money, like I said, Wu-Tang, money, cash moves everything around us. So if by some stretch of the imagination a deal can get done because the money is right, that's one thing. But when you're negotiating and you deem a guy to be untrustworthy, your antennas are up the entire time.
Right. Well, I can totally understand, Seth, why you say that. I mean, none of us in life want to be surrounded by people that we feel we can't trust or can't trust as much as the other person over there, right? I'd rather hang out with that guy than hang out with this guy if I feel I can't trust this guy. Okay, that's basic. But, there's it's hard to know what was in the mind of those agents when they made that, when they had that vote and declared Howie the fourth least trustworthy. It's hard to know what they were thinking. I'll give you a for instance. So that was a poll of 30 NFL agents. Okay. For all we know, and it was an anonymous poll, for all we know, one of those agents could have been Carson Wentz's agent. Who knows? Let's say Carson's agent was polled. Carson's agent could say Howie non-trustworthy because you signed my guy and you drafted a quarterback in the second round, 1 year later. So, is that not trustworthy? And again, I'm just totally supposing here. I have no idea, but could I see an agent in a position like that feeling that Howie is less trustworthy? Maybe. But again, I'll go back to everything I said earlier about why I think the Hurts pick was justified. So whether the agent or whether Carson is happy with Jalen Hurts being picked, and certainly Carson said everything right publicly, but inside he's probably like, what the heck, right? Of course he's like, what the heck? I could see someone answering less trustworthiness for Howie on a basis like that. It could be just things like, I mean, I don't want to say getting one over on someone in a negotiation, but I mean, let's be real. Howie Roseman's job is to have the very best players he possibly can on the field for the cheapest price possible. That's his job because that's where value comes, especially in an NFL world. This isn't like baseball. I mean, it just every dollar I spend on player X is one less dollar I can spend on player Y. That's just the way it works. So, if Howie is viewed as shrewd, some might see that as lacking trustworthiness, but that might just be good business dealings in a salary cap world. I mean, this is, this isn't like fifth grade here where, this is all, let's all get along and go out and play at recess and, everyone gets a turn at bat. I mean, it's, this is the NFL. And I know what you mean in principle. Believe me, Seth, I totally get it. But it was not lost on me that the front office executive that won that poll, lost it, if you will, for being the least trustworthy was Bill Belichick. Now, maybe that's purely because of, the stuff the Patriots had done through the years for 20 years with Belichick as the coach. And on that basis, agents voted for him because of PSI and footballs and did they or did they not tape the Rams practice and all these issues and Spygate and all that stuff. But maybe they were actually answering Belichick, the general manager guy. Right. I don't know. And I'll tell you this, if Belichick, the general manager guy, was the reason they answered that question with Belichick 1 and Howie 4, if that's the reason, that would tell me Howie's on the right track. Honestly, that's the way I view it.
Well enough. I mean, my definition of untrustworthy is when you give me your word about something or you tell me that this is the way it is, and then you go in the other direction. If that's,
Except if it's but Seth, except I agree with you again in principle, but except if it's warranted. Like, would Andre Dillard's agent view Howie as untrustworthy because Peters was kind of dangled as an option for months, actually was brought in? We all know there's the chance that he moves to left tackle. Like, Andre Dillard's agent might say, you're not giving my guy a fair shot. But if I'm Howie, I'm saying, hey, Dillard's agent, here's the deal, buddy. But I got this other guy called Carson Wentz. And the main job of this organization is to protect him and to nurture him and to build him up to be a top 5 player in the sport. So if your guy doesn't cut it, I don't care that I just drafted him in the first round 15 months ago. He's out and the other guy's in. And if you're going to call me untrustworthy because I told you one thing and then we went the other way, well, that's only because your guy didn't live up to his end of the bargain. No, and maybe somebody just hear that.
I get you, but there's a difference between competition.
Yeah.
And doing what's best for the team. And my guy, we go in, he's had a hell of a year, okay? And instead of you doing what's right by him contractually based upon what you said you would do, you present me something different or you go against your word. I mean, I trust me, I get the business side of it. I mean, I've been there. I know what it is to have my agent go in and the GM say this, and this. There's a reason why you have an agent,
right?
You know, because if I had to sit in and listen to the crap that's coming out of his mouth about what he thinks about me, I'd hit him in the mouth. But you know, the minute I walk in to sign the contract, he's like, no hard feelings. You know, it's just business. You know, I'm like, dude, get out of here with that. You know, you don't. But there's a difference between doing business and negotiating. I get that. But at the other end of the spectrum, when you tell me something and I work for you, your word has got to be bond. Because if your word is bond, why do you think guys love Buddy so much? Because you know what? You could take to the bank what he said. He wasn't going to lie to you. He wasn't going to change. That's the way it was, you know. But when people say that they're going to do something and they do something else, you know, the antenna goes up, and that's untrustworthy. Now, if you're talking about competition, nothing's guaranteed to anybody. I got drafted in the 8th round. Nothing was guaranteed. I came in, competed my behind off. But you know what? When Buddy told me, hey, you got your foot in the door. The job is yours to lose. Kick the SOB open. Okay? That's what he said. And he stuck to his word because as long as I continued to play well, guess what? The job was mine.
Yeah. Listen, it's great. I mean, I get it. I hear you. It's hard to know without knowing the intent behind those voters in that poll.
Absolutely.
But I believe me, I understand your point, but you know,
it's a worthy conversation. Listen, my man, it's been a blast, man. You know, we're coming up on 1 hour and 25 minutes. I told you we could chat it up for real. I appreciate your time. I say it every single week that our greatest asset and our most value is our time. So I appreciate you sharing your time with me, giving me 1 hour and 25 minutes of your time. Look forward to seeing you, you know, once the craziness kind of lays down, and hopefully we got a football season coming up. But thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.
Seth, I appreciate you. I appreciate the kind words. It is my honor to be on your show. Anytime, I'm happy to do it anytime. And listen, stay safe, obviously, you and your family during this crisis. And things are going to get better. It's going to take some more time, but we're going to get there as a society. And I appreciate you, man. And it's been a pleasure to be on your show.
Absolutely, my man. To my listeners, my viewers, thank you guys for tuning in once again. I want to thank my producers, Tom Schrader and Derek Stevenson, for doing another outstanding job. We'll be back next week with another great show for you. I'm trying to line something up that you guys are going to be thrilled about next week. If I can get it lined up, another group of Eagles greats. But hey, listen, you guys be good to each other, love each other, and I'll see you guys next week. Peace.